407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Contest master, Toastmasters, and guests, these are the most famous words spoken by President Abraham Lincoln from the dedication of the battlefield cemetery at Gettysburg in November 1863. The Gettysburg Address was a stirring oration on the value of freedom and the struggle to achieve it. It was also part of a long, faltering political process. Earlier that year, Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves in the states that were in rebellion against the Union. Only in the states that were in rebellion. If you were in a loyal border state and owned slaves, you'd keep them, at least for now. The bargain preserving slavery was written into the Constitution Lincoln was sworn to uphold. Now, he did change that by pushing through the 13th Amendment. That's the drama of Steven Spielberg's Lincoln movie. But if you read a more complete biography, and I'm drawing on the one by David Herbert Donald, you realize Lincoln was slow to embrace the abolition of slavery as a practical political goal. If slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong, Lincoln said, and yet, for many years, he thought about slavery in the South the way we might think of injustice in other countries. We disapprove, but they're sovereign states, and we can't control how they govern themselves internally. Knowing that slavery was central to the economy of the South and wouldn't be given up easily, Lincoln hoped to confine it to the states where it already existed and hoped to phase it out gradually. The problem with trying to be a moderate on this issue was the expansion of the United States to the West created friction, and sometimes outbreaks of violence over whether new states would be slave or free. A house divided against itself cannot stand, Lincoln told an early Republican convention. I do not believe this government can endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect that it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. The U.S. Senator from Illinois, Democrat Stephen A. Douglas, thought the solution was to let the voters in each new state decide, very democratically, whether to allow slavery. When Lincoln challenged Douglas, their famous series of debates showed a great contrast. Douglas would roll into town in a private rail car, looking every inch the incumbent in a fine blue suit. Lincoln dressed plainly and arrived in a regular passenger car so he could talk to the voters. Douglas would bow with a flourish. Lincoln was all elbows and knees. He folded like a jackknife. Douglas had a booming, authoritative voice. Lincoln spoke in a tenor that cracked when he needed to project. Lincoln spent a lot of time distancing himself from abolitionists that year. To one hostile crowd in southern Illinois, he said, "I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races." On the hot-button issue of intermarriage, he said, "I do not understand that because I do not want a Negro woman for a slave, I must necessarily want her for a wife. My understanding is I can just let her alone." In that same series of debates, though, he said, "The entire records of the world, from the date of the Declaration of Independence, may be searched in vain for one single affirmation from one single man. The Negro was not included in the Declaration of Independence." Lincoln had a sense of humor about his political flexibility on the issues. When someone called him two-faced, he said, "If I was two-faced, is this the one I'd be wearing?" Lincoln never did make it to the Senate, but he came back to win the presidency in 1860, edging out Douglas in a messy four-way race. He didn't call himself an abolitionist, but he was close enough that his election drove the Confederate States into rebellion. Lincoln considered it his job to bring them back. To maintain popular support for the war, he had to continually rebut charges that it was all about slavery. When the newspaper editor Horace Greeley urged him to free the slaves immediately, Lincoln wrote a letter to the editor. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union. It is not either to save or to destroy slavery. What Lincoln didn't tell Greeley was he already had a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation sitting on his desk. He was waiting for a Union victory so he could announce it from a position of strength. Politically, he had to be able to justify it as an act of war that would weaken the Confederacy, not as a moral act. Lincoln was a politician. He spoke quite fluently out of both sides of his mouth. By modern standards, he could also be judged a racist. Yes, the great emancipator. The record's not quite clear. He was perfectly respectful to free black leaders who visited him at the White House. But we know he told some racist jokes. And one of those questions he tended to dodge was whether black people were truly equal in terms of intelligence and abilities. I'm not sure he thought that they were. What he did believe, however, was that we all deserve an equal chance to make the best use of whatever gifts God has given us. A chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Toastmasters.